Have you ever stopped to think about the weight of a simple act of kindness? I'm not talking about those calculated acts, done to impress or gain something in return. I'm talking about that raw, instinctive kindness that springs from within, when you see someone broken in front of you, and simply can't turn your back on them. It's the kind of kindness that puts you in danger without you realizing it. The kind that changes destinies. And Sarah was about to discover this in the worst possible way. It was an ordinary Tuesday. The night shift always dragged on at the diner, the kind of work that dulls the mind and turns the hours into a gray mass of dirty dishes and reheated coffee. The whole city seemed dead after 10 o'clock, except for the passing truckers and the occasional lost soul with nowhere to go. Sarah knew that emptiness well. 3 years waiting tables in that godforsaken place had taught her a bitter truth. Most people prefer not to see the pain, not to see the need, not to see anything that would force them to feel anything beyond their own safe routine. But that night, when the diner door creaked open with a damp sound and the wind carried along a staggering figure, Sarah saw it. Impossible not to see it. The man was soaked from head to toe, as if he had walked through a deluge. Rain streamed from his dark hair in thick strands, forming puddles on the worn linoleum floor. But it wasn't just water. There was dried blood at the corner of his mouth, a dark stain that contrasted sharply with the sickly pallor of his skin. His hands trembled as he clutched some crumpled banknotes, as if that money were the only concrete thing still holding him to reality. Sarah felt the air change. The other diner patrons, 2 men in the corner, and a lone woman by the window all looked away at the same time. It was a synchronized, almost rehearsed movement, that kind of silent rejection that hurts more than any words. Nobody wanted to get involved. Nobody wanted trouble. And it was obvious, from that man's appearance, that he brought plenty of trouble with him. But Sarah didn't turn away. Maybe it was tiredness, maybe it was stubbornness. Or maybe it was just that old voice echoing in her head. Her father's voice saying that kindness was the only inheritance worth leaving in the world. Without thinking much, without calculating the consequences, she pushed a plate of hot food across the counter. Chicken pie, mashed potatoes. Simple things, but served with the kind of care that made a difference. Along with it went a clean towel, still smelling of soap. The man looked up at her, and Sarah saw something that took her breath away. It wasn't gratitude, it was surprise. Pure, raw surprise, as if he had forgotten that such gestures still existed in the world. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but the words didn't come. Only that intense look, laden with something Sarah couldn't name. Fear, relief, guilt. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't ask where he came from, or what had happened, or why there was blood on him. Sarah had learned that sometimes not asking is the greatest kindness you can offer. So she simply nodded, a silent permission for him to eat in peace, and went back behind the counter as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. Sarah could feel that strange tingling in her back that comes when you know you're being watched. And it wasn't just the man in front of her. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the other customers shifting uncomfortably, grabbing their things too quickly, leaving without finishing their coffee. The woman at the window threw money on the table without waiting for her change. The 2 men in the corner exchanged glances and disappeared through the door like ghosts. Within minutes, the diner was empty. Only Sarah and that stranger remained. The silence was thick, broken only by the sound of rain hitting the metal roof and his labored breathing as he ate slowly, each bite seeming to require immense effort. Sarah wiped the counter mechanically, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest. He had done the right thing, hadn't he? Feeding someone who was hungry was the most basic, most human thing there was. So why that feeling that you had just crossed an invisible line? Why did the room seem smaller, the air heavier, as if the whole world were holding its breath? When he finished and stood to leave, leaving the crumpled notes on the counter, Sarah noticed something that made her heart race. The chair where he had sat had a torn piece of fabric stuck to the backrest. Dark blue fabric, uniform fabric. And on the back of his jacket, almost erased by the rain, a stain that looked like peeling gold paint. The kind of gold that came from a badge. Sarah swallowed hard and stared at the closed door. Outside, the rain continued to fall. And across the street, half hidden in the darkness, a black car sat with its headlights off. She couldn't see who was inside, but she could feel their eyes, watching, waiting. It was then that Sarah understood a terrible truth. She hadn't just helped a stranger. She had become part of something much bigger, much more dangerous than anything she had ever known. And now, whether she liked it or not, she was in it. That night, Sarah barely slept. Lying on the narrow bed in the apartment above the diner, she stared at the cracked ceiling, listening to every street noise, every car that passed too slowly, every shadow that moved outside the window. The image of that man wouldn't leave her head. The dried blood, the trembling hands, and especially that look of someone who had forgotten that kindness still existed. She wondered who he really was. The uniform fabric clinging to the chair didn't lie. He had been a policeman, or still was. But if he was, why was he on the run? Why did he seem like a hunted man instead of a hunter? Sarah tossed and turned in bed, trying to push the thoughts away, but they always came back, persistent like the rain that still beat against the window. Fear crept in slowly, stealthily. It wasn't an immediate, explosive fear. It was the kind of fear that settles in your chest and stays there, heavy, reminding you that something has changed, that you made a choice, and that choices have consequences. Sarah closed her eyes tightly, trying to convince herself that she was exaggerating. It was just a lost man. She had given him food. Nothing out of the ordinary. People did that every day. But people didn't have dark cars waiting on the other side of the street. People didn't leave behind trails of blood and torn uniform fabric. People didn't carry with them that kind of heavy silence, as if their very presence were a warning. If you've ever felt like you did something right, but that this right thing might have changed everything in your life, you understand what Sarah was feeling at that moment. And if this feeling resonated with you, if something in this story has touched a part of you, leave a comment below saying what has impacted you the most so far. Here at Heart of Protection Stories, we believe that stories like this need to be shared, felt, and lived together. So stay with us, because this is just the beginning. The next morning, Sarah went down to the diner, trying to act as if nothing had happened. She turned on the lights, made the coffee, turned the chairs back up on the tables. But when she passed the chair where the man had sat, she stopped. The fabric was still there, stuck to the backrest. She carefully ripped it off and held it in the palm of her hand. Dark blue, sturdy, official. Her heart raced again. She should throw it away, forget it, pretend it had never happened. But instead, Sarah tucked the piece of fabric into her apron pocket, as if it were proof that she hadn't imagined anything. That this man was real. That the danger was real. The day passed slowly. Customers came and went, but Sarah barely paid attention. Her eyes kept returning to the street, searching for the dark car, searching for unfamiliar faces, searching for any sign that it wasn't over. And that was exactly what terrified her, the growing certainty that it wasn't over. That, somehow, by reaching out to that man, she had opened a door she didn't know how to close. At 3 p.m, when the activity was at its peak, Sarah noticed something strange. A man was sitting near the window. He hadn't ordered anything besides coffee, wasn't looking at his cell phone. He wasn't reading a newspaper. He was just observing the street, the door, and, from time to time, Sarah. It wasn't a casual glance. It was the gaze of someone fulfilling a function, watching. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. She continued working, feigning normalcy, but each movement felt heavy, forced. When the man finally stood up and left without saying anything, she took a deep breath, trembling. She ran to the door and turned the key in the lock. Even though it was the middle of the afternoon, she rested her forehead against the cold glass and closed her eyes. That's when she realized the tire of her car, parked outside, was completely flat, punctured. Sarah's eyes widened. She was sure she'd been fine that morning, absolutely sure. And it was at that moment, with her heart pounding and her hands sweating, that Sarah understood what that man had seen in her eyes the night before. It wasn't just surprise, it was recognition, because he knew, from the very first second, that by accepting her help, he was putting her in danger, and yet, he let her help. Now, Sarah was on the other side of that equation, and there was no going back. Sarah stood there, staring at the flat tire through the glass of the locked door, and felt something crumble inside her. It wasn't fear yet. It was something prior to fear. It was the confirmation that she had mattered, that someone had noticed her existence, and that this, for the first time in years, had real consequences. 3 years of invisibility had been replaced, overnight, by attention she hadn't asked for and didn't know how to handle. She leaned her back against the door and slid down to the floor, hugging her knees. The empty diner around her seemed larger, colder, as if the walls had moved away from her. Sarah closed her eyes and let the memory return, the one she always tried to push away. Her father's voice echoing in the kitchen of the old house, saying that kindness was the only inheritance worth having. He had died believing that. He died alone in a public hospital, surrounded by hurried people who barely looked at his face. And Sarah swore she would never be like that she would never ignore someone in need, that she would never turn her back. But now, sitting on that cold floor, she wondered if her father had misunderstood everything. If kindness wasn't an inheritance, if kindness was a debt that someone always came to collect. From that moment on, everything began to change silently. Sarah got up slowly, wiped her hands on her apron, and locked up the diner early that day. She called a tow truck for her car and walked home, glancing over her shoulder at every corner. The city was too quiet, or perhaps she was just hearing things that had always been there, but that she had never needed to hear before. Footsteps, engines, shadows that moved too fast or too slow. When she arrived at the apartment, Sarah locked the door, pushed a chair against it, and went straight to the bathroom. She washed her face with cold water, trying to wake up from the feeling of living a waking nightmare. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw something that made her stop. Her own eyes. Tired, yes. Scared, certainly, but also alive. For the first time in 3 years, she was truly alive, feeling something beyond boredom, loneliness, and that constant emptiness that came from serving people who never saw her. That man had seen her. He had looked up and truly seen her. And perhaps that was precisely why she couldn't simply forget. Because being seen, even by a bloodied and dangerous stranger, was better than continuing to be a ghost in her own life. Sarah dried her face and went to the kitchen. She made tea. She sat at the small table and took out the piece of dark blue fabric she had kept in her pocket. She ran her fingers over the sturdy fiber, wondering who that man really was, what he had done, why he was running, and if he was all right now, somewhere, or if he had disappeared completely from that world that seemed so ready to swallow him up. That's when she heard it. A faint noise, most imperceptible, coming from the fire escape outside the kitchen window. Sarah froze. Her heart raced. She turned her head slowly, very slowly, and saw the silhouette. A man, standing there, watching. She gripped the fabric tightly, ready to scream, ready to run. But then the figure shifted, and the dim streetlights illuminated his face. It was him, the man from the diner. Only now, without the rain, without the blood, she could see better. A defined jawline, dark, deep-set eyes, a thin scar across his left eyebrow. He slowly raised his hands in a gesture of peace, but said nothing. He just stood there, on the other side of the glass, as if asking permission to exist in that space. Sarah should have closed the curtain. She should have called the police, but instead, she stood up, walked to the window, and, with trembling hands, unlocked and opened it. The cold night wind came in along with the smell of old rain and metal. He didn't move. He just looked at her with that same surprised expression from the night before, as if he couldn't believe she had actually opened it. Sarah swallowed hard. Her voice came out weaker than she wanted, but it came out, and that was something. She asked who he was. The man hesitated, as if the answer were too complicated to fit into simple words. Then he just said his name, Cole, Sheriff. Cole and Sarah felt the ground disappear again, because sheriffs don't run away. Sheriffs don't show up bloodied in diners in the middle of the night. Sheriffs don't climb fire escapes to warn strangers about unseen dangers. Unless something had gone very, very wrong. Comment below. This makes sense to me. Cole didn't go in. He stood there on the fire escape, as if there were an invisible line he couldn't cross without explicit permission. Sarah gripped the windowsill, trying to process what was happening. Sheriff. The word echoed in her head, heavy and strange. Sheriffs wore badges. Sheriffs drove patrol cars. Sheriffs didn't show up in the middle of the night like fugitives. She looked at him again, really looked, and that's when she noticed the details that the darkness and the rush of the previous night had hidden. His boots were dirty. It wasn't ordinary mud. It was thick, red clay, stuck to the sides and soles, the kind that clings and doesn't come off easily. Sarah knew that. Clay. Everyone in town knew it. It came from the northern region, where the old copper mine had been abandoned for decades. Nobody went there. Nobody in their right mind, at least. That place was dangerous. Unstable tunnels, rotten structures, and stories. Stories of people who went in and never came back. Stories of shady dealings that happened far from the eyes of the law. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. If Cole had been there, if he had mud from that place on his boots, then he wasn't just running from something. He had gone after something. Something big enough to destroy a sheriff. This is where the story begins, to show what's really at stake. Cole noticed she was looking at his boots. He followed Sarah's gaze and then closed his eyes for a second, as if he knew exactly what she had just understood. When he opened his eyes again, there was a resignation there. He knew he couldn't hide it. Not from her. Not after she had already seen too much. Sarah took a step back. Her voice was firmer this time, filled with a courage she didn't know she possessed. She asked what he was doing in the mine. Cole took a deep breath, and for the first time since he'd appeared, he spoke honestly. His voice was hoarse, worn, but there was something solid about it. Truth. He said he'd followed a lead. A trafficking operation that used the abandoned tunnels to move drugs and money. He'd gone alone because he didn't know who else to trust. Half the department was on their payroll, and when he got there, when he saw what was really going on, it was too late to come back clean. Sarah felt her chest tighten. She asked what he had seen. Cole hesitated. He looked to the side, as if deciding how much he could tell. Then he said he had seen faces. People he knew. People who were supposed to protect the city, not destroy it. And when he tried to leave, they noticed there was a fight. There were shots fired. He narrowly escaped, but now he was marked. Wanted, not by the justice system, by the people who controlled the justice system. Sarah leaned against the wall, her legs feeling weak. The transformation happening inside her was strange, frightening, because until that moment, she had lived in a safe bubble. Not safe in a happy way, but safe in ignorance. She served coffee, cleaned tables, went home. She repeated the routine. The city around her seemed small, boring, predictable. But now, with that man standing on the fire escape, and those words still echoing in the air, Sarah realized she had never truly seen the city. She had only seen the surface. And beneath, in the shadows, things happened. Things that killed people. Cole took a step back, preparing to leave. He said he shouldn't have come. That he only wanted to make sure she was okay. That they had seen her help him, and now she was in their sights. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She asked who they were. Cole looked at her with an expression that mixed guilt and something deeper. Protection, he said. They were men who left no loose ends, men who eliminated witnesses, and she, whether she liked it or not, had become a witness. Fear finally arrived. Not that vague fear Sarah had felt when she saw the flat tire. This was concrete, real, cutting. She asked what she should do. Cole shook his head slowly. He said she needed to leave town, take what she could and go. But Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. Go where? With what money? And abandon what? The diner was all she had. That tiny apartment was all she had. Leaving meant leaving behind the only life she knew, however empty it might be. She said it out loud. She said she had nowhere to go. Cole was silent for a long moment. Then, in an even lower voice, he said he understood, and that if she stayed, he would stay too. Sarah's eyes widened. She asked why. Why did he care? He didn't even know her. Cole looked at her with an intensity that made the air seem thicker. He said that perhaps that was exactly why. Because she didn't know him, but had still helped. Because kindness like that was rare. And he had already lost too many people for not doing enough. Sarah felt something shift inside her again. It wasn't fear. It wasn't relief. It was recognition. The same recognition she had felt when she first saw Cole at the diner. She also knew what it was like to carry guilt. She also knew what it was like to feel she should have done more, been more, saved more. And perhaps that was why she didn't close the window. Perhaps that was why, instead of sending him away, she asked if he was hurt. Cole blinked, surprised. Then he nodded slowly. Sarah sighed and opened the window even wider, gesturing for him to come in. Cole hesitated, but eventually went inside. And as he passed by her, Sarah realized she had just made a decision that would change everything. Cole stood in the middle of the small kitchen, occupying a space that seemed too large for him. Sarah closed the window and pulled back the curtain, feeling the weight of the silence between them. She pointed to the chair, and he sat down slowly, as if each movement required immense effort. It was only then, in the dim light of the kitchen lamp, that Sarah truly saw his condition. The cut on his eyebrow that had stopped bleeding but was still swollen. The purple bruise spreading across the left side of his face, and the way he held the right side of his body, as if taking a deep breath hurt too much. Sarah went to the cupboard and took out the first aid kit she almost never used. She placed it on the table without saying anything. Cole looked at the kit, then at her, and there was something in his eyes that made Sarah's heart clench. Gratitude, but also guilt, as if he knew he didn't deserve it. As if he thought he was causing more trouble than the help was worth. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because what Cole wasn't saying aloud, what he carried alone in that broken chest, was the truth that gnawed at him from the inside. He shouldn't have stopped at the diner that night. Not with 3 broken ribs throbbing with every breath. Not with his face too scarred, too familiar, too sought after. He had driven straight through 3 towns before that one. Hiding, fleeing, bleeding slowly as he drove aimlessly. But exhaustion had won. Exhaustion and pain, and that silent despair of someone who can no longer bear to carry it all alone. And then he'd seen the diner light. Small, dim, but lit. And something in him, something stupid and all too human, had made him stop. Just for a minute. Just to eat something. Just to feel he was still alive. But when that woman had pushed the plate of hot food across the counter, when she had looked at him without judgment, without fear, without questions, something inside Cole had cracked. A deep fissure in the wall he'd built around himself, all those years wearing a badge. It had been so long since anyone had treated him like a human being. So long since he had only been the sheriff, the tough man, the one who shot first and regretted it later, regretted it. Cole had grown accustomed to the fear in people's eyes when he arrived. He had grown accustomed to the forced respect, the distance, the loneliness that came with authority. But she didn't know who he was. She knew nothing about him, and yet she had helped. And now, sitting in that tiny kitchen, watching Sarah open the first aid kit with hands that trembled slightly, Cole understood the weight of the decision he had made in that moment. Because by accepting her help, by letting her get close, he had put her in danger. He knew how those men operated. He knew they left no loose ends. He knew that anyone connected to him was now a target. And people like Sarah, pure, brave, naive enough to help bloodied strangers in the middle of the night, didn't last long when the wrong side of the law decided you'd seen too much. Cole closed his eyes for a second, fighting against the physical pain and the moral pain. That was far worse. He should leave. He should get out of that kitchen, down the fire escape and disappear. Leave her alone. Leave her safe. But he knew it was too late for that. They had already seen her. They already knew she had helped. And if he left now, she would be alone, exposed, vulnerable, and they would come. They would surely come. Sarah approached with cotton and alcohol. Cole opened his eyes and looked at her. There was a determination there that he hadn't expected. She wasn't doing this out of pity. She was doing it because that's who she was. And perhaps that was exactly what was destroying him inside. Because he had spent so much time surrounded by corrupt people, selfish people, people who only did the right thing when it suited them, that he had forgotten that people like Sarah still existed. She carefully cleaned the cut on his eyebrow, and Cole felt the sharp pain but didn't complain. He just lay there, letting her take care of him, while he waged a silent war. With himself, part of him wanted to push her away, to create distance, to protect her through coldness. But another part, the human part he thought had died somewhere between years of service and betrayal. That part wanted to stay, wanted to let someone take care of him, wanted to believe he still deserved that. Sarah noticed he was clutching his side tightly. She asked if she could see. Cole hesitated, but eventually lifted his shirt slowly. Sarah held her breath. His side was purple, swollen, with clear impact marks, broken ribs. She was sure of it. She asked if he'd gone to the hospital. Cole let out a dry, humorless laugh. He said he couldn't. Hospitals asked questions. Hospitals kept records, and records led them straight to him. Sarah bit her lip, trying to think. She wasn't a doctor. She didn't know how to treat broken ribs beyond the basics she'd seen online once. But she knew he needed rest, time, safety, and looking at that man sitting in her kitchen, injured and exhausted, but still trying to protect her somehow, Sarah understood something profound. He hadn't come there just to warn her of the danger. He had come because he had no one else, because he was alone, and because, perhaps for the first time in a long time, someone had reminded him that kindness still existed. Sarah grabbed a clean towel, wet it with cold water, and placed it on his swollen side. Cole closed his eyes again, and this time Sarah saw something he had been trying to hide. Exhaustion. Not just physical, emotional. The exhaustion of someone who had carried the world alone for too long. She found herself wanting to ask so many things. When was the last time he truly slept? When was the last time someone cared for him? When was the last time he felt safe? But Sarah didn't ask any of that. He just stayed there, watching silently, while the night wore on outside, and danger lurked in the shadows. And Cole, for the first time since everything had fallen apart, allowed himself to relax. Just a little. Just enough to breathe without feeling like he was going to break completely. He writes in the comments, "I understood that pain." Cole slept on the sofa that night. Sarah had insisted, against all his protests. She had given him an old blanket, a thin pillow, and had stayed awake in bed for hours, listening to his heavy breathing from the other room, wondering what he had done. When he finally fell asleep, it was a restless sleep, full of shadows, and footsteps, and doors, slowly opening. She woke up with the sun streaming through the window and the apartment empty. Cole had left without making a sound. He had left the blanket neatly folded on the sofa and a small note on the kitchen table. Sarah picked up the paper with sleepy hands and read it. Just 3 words written in firm, masculine handwriting. "Thank you. Be careful." Sarah crumpled the paper and threw it in the trash. She didn't know if she was relieved or disappointed that he was gone. But life didn't wait for answers. She went down to the diner, opened the doors, turned on the lights, and tried to pretend it was just another day. But it wasn't. She knew it wasn't. What seemed simple began to reveal layers that no one expected. The flat tire was the first thing. Sarah had gone out to throw the trash in the back when she noticed. The right rear tire of the car was completely flat, the sidewall ripped open as if someone had stuck a knife in it and twisted it. She stood there, holding the trash bag, feeling her stomach churn. It could be a coincidence. Tires went flat. It happened. But deep down, she knew it wasn't a coincidence. She knew from the eyes she'd felt on her back in the last few days. He knew from the dark car that still occasionally appeared across the street. He knew because Cole had warned her, and she had chosen not to believe him completely. I had chosen to think I was exaggerating. Sarah called a tow truck, changed the tire, and went back to work. 2 days later, he arrived in the morning and found the diner's side window broken, glass scattered on the floor, cold wind streaming in. Nothing had been stolen. The cash register was intact, the tables, the chairs, everything in its place. Only the window, broken, like a warning. Sarah wiped the glass with trembling hands, taped a makeshift plastic sheet to cover the hole, and called the glazer. Accident, she told herself. Bored teenagers. Random vandalism. But the voice in her head, that voice that sounded terribly like Cole's, said otherwise. This isn't an accident. This is pressure. They're testing you. And then, that same afternoon, the man walked in. Sarah was alone in the diner. Business was slow, just her and a lone customer reading a newspaper in the corner. The door opened, and a tall man, in a dark suit with cold eyes, entered slowly. He didn't look at the menu. He didn't look at the tables. He looked straight at Sarah. He sat on the counter, right in front of her, and waited. Sarah felt her mouth go dry but forced herself to approach. She asked what he wanted. The man smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He said he just wanted to talk. Ask a few questions. Sarah nodded, trying to appear calm, but she felt her heart beating so hard, she was sure he could hear it. The man asked if she'd seen anyone interesting pass by recently. Maybe on last week's rainy night. Someone hurt. Someone looking for help. Sarah felt her blood run cold. The image of Cole, soaked and bloody, on the counter, exploded in her mind. But she shook her head, said she didn't remember anything. Lots of people passed through the diner. She didn't pay attention to everyone. The man tilted his head, studying her face as if he could read every lie written there. He said nothing for a long moment. He just stared. And then, slowly, he smiled again. He said he understood. That memory was a complicated thing, indeed. But that if she remembered anything at all, it was important that she tell him. Because hiding information could be dangerous. Very dangerous. Sarah swallowed hard. She said that if she remembered anything, she would certainly let him know. The man nodded, stood up slowly, and left. But he left too slowly. Each step measured. Each movement deliberate. As if he wanted her to feel the weight of his presence even after the door closed. Sarah stood behind the counter, her hands pressed against the cold surface, trying to breathe. The customer in the corner had left. Sometime without her noticing. The diner was empty, silent, and for the first time since it all began, Sarah felt real fear. Not that abstract, distant fear, it was concrete fear. Fear that filled her chest and made her legs tremble. She locked the door with trembling hands, flipped the sign to locked even though it was only 3 in the afternoon, and ran upstairs to the apartment. She locked the door. She pushed the chair against it. She closed all the curtains. And then, finally, she let the fear come. She sat on the kitchen floor and hugged her knees, trying to understand how she had gotten to this point. How a simple act of kindness, a plate of food, a clean towel, had turned into this. For the first time in her life, Sarah truly understood what Cole had been trying to say. Kindness had a price, and someone was collecting it. Not with money, not with words, but with silent threats that grew stronger each day, slowly tightening their grip until she broke, or ran away, or gave them what they wanted. And worst of all, Sarah didn't know if she had the strength to resist. She didn't know if she was brave enough to keep lying. She didn't know if it was worth protecting a man she barely knew, who had appeared and disappeared from her life like a ghost, leaving only destruction in his wake. But then Sarah remembered his eyes, that look of surprise when she had pushed the plate of food away, that raw gratitude when she had tended to his wounds. And she remembered something else. She remembered that he had returned, that even knowing the danger, even though he could have disappeared forever, Cole had come back to warn her, to try to protect her. Sarah wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up slowly. She didn't know what came next. She didn't know if those men would return. She didn't know if Cole would return either. But one thing she knew, she wasn't going to break. Not yet. Because maybe, just maybe, kindness was worth the price, even when the price was too high. Sarah spent the entire night without sleeping. Every noise in the street made her jump. Every car headlight that passed by the window seemed like a threat. She sat in the darkness, hugging her knees, trying to figure out what to do. But there was no answer. There was no instruction manual for surviving something like this. When the sun finally rose, she went down to the diner, with deep, dark circles under her eyes and hands that were still trembling. It was a strangely busy morning. Truck drivers passing through, workers heading to their shift. Sarah served coffee and took orders on autopilot, her mind far away, trapped in circular thoughts that led nowhere. That's when the gas station owner walked in. Eddie, a man in his 60s, big belly, hat stained with grease. He came every morning for coffee and toast. But this time, Eddie didn't sit in his usual spot. He came straight to the counter, where Sarah was, and lowered his voice. She could tell from his expression that something was wrong. Eddie looked around, checking if anyone was listening, and then leaned forward. He asked if she was all right. Sarah frowned. She said yes. Why wouldn't she be? Eddie hesitated, running a hand over his tired face. From that moment on, everything began to change silently. Eddie said he'd heard things, rumors, people saying she'd helped someone she shouldn't have. Sarah felt her stomach sink but kept a neutral expression. She asked what he was talking about. Eddie sighed and finally blurted out, "That man you fed on that rainy night." It was Sheriff Cole. The name fell on them like a bomb. Sarah stood motionless, gripping the pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. Eddie continued, the words coming out quick and low, laden with urgency. Cole had disappeared 3 days ago. He had raided an illegal operation alone, without backup, without authorization, and he had killed 2 men in the process. At least, that's what they said. Sarah felt the world spin. Killed, the word echoed in her head, heavy and impossible. But Eddie wasn't finished yet. He said the state police were looking for Cole. But it wasn't just the police. There were other people too. Dangerous people. People who didn't wear badges, but who had more power than any uniform. Sarah swallowed hard. She asked how Eddie knew all this. He shrugged. He said gas stations were like confessionals. Everyone stopped there. Everyone talked too much when they were tired or nervous. And in the last few days, a lot of people had shown up asking questions. Outsiders. People who didn't look like tourists. Sarah felt her legs weaken. She leaned against the counter, trying to process it. Sheriff, fugitive, murderer. The words didn't fit. Not with the man who had sat in her kitchen, letting her tend to his wounds. Not with that look of raw gratitude and deep guilt. Not with that simple note. "Thank you. Be careful." Eddie touched her arm lightly, bringing her back. He told her she needed to be careful. That if she had really helped Cole, she was in danger now. Because people like that didn't leave witnesses. Didn't leave loose ends. Sarah shook her head, feeling her throat tighten. She said she didn't know anything. That she had only given food to a hungry man. Eddie looked at her with pity and something more. Genuine concern. He said he believed her, but that didn't matter. What mattered was what those men believed. And they clearly thought Sarah knew more than she should. Eddie walked away, grabbed the coffee he'd ordered, and left, leaving Sarah alone with the truth that had just exploded in her face. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Sarah couldn't stop thinking. Cole had killed 2 men. Or had he? Eddie had said that's what they said. Rumors. Stories. But stories came from somewhere, didn't they? Sarah remembered the dried blood at the corner of his mouth, the broken ribs, the way he moved, as if every gesture was calculated, rehearsed. He was a sheriff. He was trained to fight, to shoot, to kill when necessary. But he had also been a sheriff trained to protect, to serve, to do the right thing even when the right thing was difficult. Sarah remembered his words. He had followed a lead, a drug trafficking operation. Half the department was on the payroll. He had gone alone because he didn't know who to trust. And when he tried to leave, they noticed. There was a fight. There were gunshots. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to piece things together. If Cole had killed, had it been in self-defense? Had it been to escape? Or had it been something else? Something darker, something she didn't want to consider. The stories didn't add up. Eddie had said the police were looking for Cole, but Cole had said he couldn't trust the police, that half of them were corrupt. So who was telling the truth? Who were the villains? Who were the heroes? And where did Sarah fit into all of this? She had fed the county's most wanted man. She had taken care of him. She had lied to protect him. And now, whoever was after him knew she was close. Too close. Sarah locked up the diner early again. She went upstairs to her apartment, her legs heavy and her chest tight. She sat in the kitchen, in the same spot where Cole had sat days before, and tried to think clearly. But clarity was impossible when everything around her was shrouded in lies, half-truths, and unseen dangers. She thought about running away, getting in her car, driving far away, and never coming back. But running away meant admitting she had something to hide. It meant confirming she knew more than she should. And besides, where could she run to? She had no money, no family, no one. Sarah rested her head on the table and let the weariness wash over her. She was exhausted. Exhausted from being afraid. Exhausted from not knowing who to trust. Exhausted from carrying alone the weight of decisions she never asked to make. And it was then, in that moment of complete vulnerability, that she heard it. A faint noise coming from the fire escape. Sarah slowly lifted her head, her heart racing. She looked at the window and saw the silhouette. Cole. Again. Standing there like a ghost, unable to rest. Sarah stood up, walked to the window, and opened it. This time, there was no surprise. This time, there was only weariness, and a question that needed to be asked. She looked him in the eyes and asked directly, "Did you kill those men?" Cole didn't look away. He didn't hesitate. He simply said yes. And Sarah felt something break inside her. It wasn't disappointment. It wasn't fear. It was understanding. Because she saw in his eyes the weight of that truth. She saw that he carried it like a cross. She saw that it hadn't been easy. It hadn't been a choice. It had been survival. She comments, "I saw that truth too." Sarah didn't close the window. She didn't ask him to come in. She just stood there, holding the edge of the glass, looking at the man who had just admitted to taking lives. Cole held her gaze, waiting for judgment, waiting for rejection, waiting for her to do what any sensible person would do and send him away forever. But Sarah did none of that. Instead, she asked why. Her voice was low, controlled, but something was breaking underneath. Cole took a deep breath, and Sarah saw the pain pierce his face. He said they shot first, that he tried to leave without a confrontation, but they had surrounded him, that it was him or them, and that he chose to live. Sarah nodded. Slowly, she asked if he regretted anything. Cole closed his eyes for a second. That was far too long. When he opened them, there was a brutal honesty there. He said he regretted a lot of things. Going alone, not realizing sooner how rotten everything was. Trusting the wrong people, but surviving. No, he didn't regret that. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject. Because what Cole didn't say, what he kept to himself at that moment, was the conflict that was destroying him inside. He had spent the last few days watching the diner from afar, hidden in the darkness, watching Sarah open the doors every morning, watching the customers come and go, watching those men in suits appear, watching the fear grow in her movements. And every day, Cole waged the same war with himself. He knew what he had to do. The logical answer, the right answer, was to disappear. To hit the road and leave before she paid for something that wasn't her fault. Before his presence turned her into a permanent target. Sarah hadn't asked to be dragged into this. He hadn't asked to become a witness. She hadn't asked to be put in the crosshairs of men who killed for far less. But leaving now, leaving her alone, meant condemning her in another way. Because those men had already seen her. They already knew she had helped. And men like that didn't leave loose ends. They didn't leave living witnesses. Cole knew their protocol. He'd seen it happen before. People who knew too much simply disappeared. Car, accident, robbery gone wrong, overdose, always something that seemed like a coincidence until you put the pieces together and saw the pattern. And Sarah was now in the pattern. She was on the list, and if Cole left, she would be alone. Without protection, without anyone who understood the danger, without anyone who could warn her when they came. Because they would come. It was only a matter of time. So Cole stayed, night after night, watching, surveillance, trying to convince himself he was doing the right thing, but doubt gnawed at him. Because being near her meant making her a permanent target beside him. It meant that wherever he went, danger would follow. And she would always be in the line of fire, always at risk, always paying for decisions he had made. The choice seemed simple when he put it into words. Her life now or her life later. Protect her in the present or give her a chance at a future far from all of this. But nothing was simple when he looked at her face. When he remembered her kindness. When he felt that crack in his chest that came every time someone treated him like a person instead of a weapon. Cole had already lost too many people by making the wrong choices. He had lost the partner who trusted him and ended up dead in an ambush. He had lost the trust of the department he swore to serve. He had lost his own identity when he realized that half the people he was supposed to protect were the same ones who needed to be stopped. And now, he was about to lose Sarah too, one way or another. If he stayed, she would live in constant fear. Always looking over her shoulder, always hoping the door would open and it would be them. Cole couldn't imagine doing that to someone, especially someone like her. Someone who deserved peace, deserved normalcy, deserved a life without worrying about whether today would be the day her kindness would finally kill her. But if he left, Sarah would be alone when they came. And Cole knew he couldn't live with that. Couldn't wake up every day somewhere far away, safe, knowing he had abandoned the only person who had ever seen him as human, instead of a threat. He couldn't carry another death on his conscience, especially hers. Sarah realized he was waging some kind of internal battle. She saw in his eyes that silent conflict, that pain stemming from impossible decisions. She asked him what he was thinking. Cole hesitated. He ran a hand through his hair, a tired gesture of someone who had thought too much and gotten nowhere. He told the truth. He said he didn't know whether to stay or leave, that both choices put her in danger, that he had no good option, only bad options and worse options, and that he was tired of making the wrong choice, tired of destroying everything he touched. Sarah felt a tightening in her chest. It wasn't pity, it was understanding. Because she also knew that, she also knew what it was like to feel that any decision led to a bad place. She heard herself saying something she hadn't planned. She said that maybe the choice wasn't his alone, that maybe she also had a say in it. Cole looked at her, surprised. Sarah continued, her words now firmer. She said she understood the danger, that she knew he was trying to protect her, but that she wasn't a child. She didn't need someone to decide for her, and that if he left now, without giving her a chance to choose, he would be taking away the only thing that still mattered, the choice. Cole fell silent. Sarah saw something change in his eyes. It wasn't relief. It wasn't a solution. It was just a slight loosening of the impossible tension he carried alone. As if, for the first time, he realized he didn't have to carry everything. That maybe, just maybe, he could share the burden. He asked her what she wanted. Sarah didn't hesitate. She said she wanted the truth. The whole truth. No half measures, no protection through ignorance. If she was going to be in danger anyway, she preferred to know exactly what she was dealing with. Cole nodded slowly, and then he began to tell her. Cole finally climbed in through the window and sat in the same kitchen chair. Sarah closed the curtain and sat across from him, separated only by the small table and everything that still needed to be said. The dim light of the lamp cast shadows on his face, making the scars deeper, his eyes darker. But Sarah didn't look away. She had asked for the truth, and she was going to listen to the end. Cole started from the beginning. He recounted the anonymous tip he'd received 6 months earlier, an envelope with no return address left at the police station, containing photos, dates, and names. A drug trafficking operation that used the abandoned mine as a distribution point. He'd taken it to the captain, to his colleagues, to anyone who would listen. But no one wanted to investigate. There was always an excuse. Lack of resources, lack of evidence, lack of time. That's when Cole realized it wasn't a lack of will. It was an excessive interest in keeping everything hidden. He started investigating on his own. He followed cars. He wrote down license plates. He took photos. And the more he discovered, the more names he recognized. Police officers he should respect. Politicians he should protect. Businessmen who donated to the community. All connected, all protecting each other. This is where the story begins to show what's really at stake. Sarah listened in silence, feeling the weight of each word. Cole explained that he had gathered evidence for months, documents, recordings, enough proof to bring down half the city. And when he finally had everything, when he was ready to take it to the FBI, they found out. Someone in the department, someone he trusted, had betrayed him. The ambush at the mine wasn't an accident. It was a planned execution. Cole had gone there following a false lead, planted specifically to take him to the right place at the right time. But he had survived years on the streets. He had instinct. He sensed the trap a second before it was too late. And when the shooting started, he returned fire. Not by choice, by reflex, by necessity. Sarah felt her throat tighten as he described what it had been like. The darkness of the tunnels, the echoing sound of gunfire, the smell of gunpowder and blood. He had killed 2 men that night, and had wounded 3, but he had survived. He had retrieved the evidence he was hiding there and had fled, because he knew that if he stayed, if he tried to explain, he would be killed before he could open his mouth. Cole stopped talking. Silence filled the kitchen, heavy and dense. Sarah processed everything. She tried to piece it all together. She tried to understand how a man she had sworn to protect had become a fugitive. How kindness and violence could coexist in the same person. How she had become involved in something so much bigger, so much more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. She asked where the evidence was now. Cole said it was hidden, in a safe place. But he needed time to figure out who he could trust to give it to. Because giving it to the wrong person meant certain death, and giving it to the right person meant becoming a target for everyone who appeared in those documents. Sarah nodded slowly. She asked why he had come back, why he had risked everything to warn her. Cole was silent for a long moment. Then he told the truth. He said he couldn't leave her alone, that he knew what those men did to witnesses, and that he couldn't live knowing he had condemned her for being kind. Sarah felt something shift inside her. It wasn't passion. It wasn't attraction in the traditional sense. It was something deeper. Recognition. Trust born of necessity. A bond forged under pressure. She looked at the man sitting in her kitchen, broken and dangerous and desperate, and realized she believed him. She didn't know if it was smart. She didn't know if it was right. But she believed him. Cole felt it, too. He saw something in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a long time. Acceptance. Not blind, not naive, but conscious. Sarah knew who he was. She knew what he had done. She knew the risks. And yet she was there, choosing to stay, choosing to trust. And that changed everything. Sarah was the first to break the silence. She said he could stay, not forever, but for as long as necessary, until they figured out what to do, until things cooled down. Cole shook his head. He said he couldn't, that it was too dangerous. But Sarah insisted. She said he had already put her in danger just by existing. That hiding him or not hiding him didn't change the fact that she was already in their sights. So at least she shouldn't be alone. Cole looked at her for a long time. And then, finally, he nodded. Sarah got up and went to the closet. She grabbed extra pillows, blankets, clean towels. She set up a makeshift bed on the sofa while Cole watched silently. When she finished, she turned and said he needed to rest, that he looked like he hadn't slept properly in days. Cole didn't argue. He just thanked her with a nod. Sarah went to the bedroom but left the door ajar. She lay on the bed, listening to the sounds of him settling into the living room. And for the first time since it all began, she felt something other than fear. It wasn't exactly safety, but it was a feeling of not being alone, that someone was there, someone vigilant, someone who understood the danger and knew how to face it. Cole felt it too. Lying on the uncomfortable sofa, staring at the cracked ceiling, he realized that for the first time in weeks, he wasn't completely alert. He wasn't ready to rush out at any second. There was something about Sarah's apartment, something about her presence, that made him relax just enough to breathe without pain. In the following days, they developed a strange routine. Cole would leave before dawn, disappear during the day, and return after dark. Sarah would open the diner, work, and pretend everything was normal. And every night, when she locked everything up and went upstairs, he was there. Sometimes on the fire escape, sometimes already inside, waiting. And gradually, they began to talk. They weren't deep conversations. Not at first. They were small questions. How was their day? If anyone had shown up. If they had noticed anything strange. But slowly, the questions became more personal. Sarah talked about her father, about the legacy of kindness that came at too high a price. Cole talked about the partner he had lost, about the guilt he carried. And at some point, without either of them realizing exactly when, each other's presence ceased to be merely a necessity and became a choice. Sarah didn't turn on the kitchen light to signal danger. She turned it on because she wanted him to know he was welcome. Cole didn't stay in the shadows just to protect. He stayed because it was the only place where he still felt human. Write in the comments. I understand that. Pain. The routine continued for a few more days. Cole would arrive after dark. Sarah would leave the window unlocked. They would talk in the small kitchen, sharing the silence and sometimes words. And then, suddenly, everything changed. The men in suits stopped showing up. The dark car that was always parked across the street disappeared. No one asked questions anymore. No one broke windows or slashed tires anymore. Sarah noticed on the third day that there was no sign of threat. She was cleaning the diner tables when she realized she hadn't looked out onto the street searching for dangerous faces. She hadn't felt that tightness in her chest every time the door opened. She hadn't trembled when locking the car. The constant tension that had become part of her body began to loosen. And for the first time in over a week, Sarah took a deep breath, a real one, filling her lungs completely without feeling like she was going to run out of air. Maybe it was over. The idea had grown in her head throughout the day. Maybe they had given up. Maybe they had realized she really didn't know anything. Or maybe they had found Cole somewhere else, followed another lead, forgotten about her completely. Sarah found herself smiling as she served coffee. She found herself humming softly as she washed dishes. The lightness was strange after so much weight, almost unreal. What seems simple begins to reveal layers that no one expected. When Sarah locked up the diner that night, the sky was clear, full of stars she hadn't seen in weeks. She grabbed her car keys, adjusted her bag on her shoulder, and turned to leave. That's when he saw her, Cole leaning against her car. But he wasn't hidden in the shadows as usual. He was there, exposed under the dim light of the lamppost, as if he no longer cared about being seen. Sarah felt her heart race. Not from fear, from surprise. Cole was different. Without the dark coat he always wore. Without the tense posture of someone ready to flee at any second. Just a tired man leaning against an old car, with eyes that had seen too much, and yet continued to stare. Sarah approached slowly. She asked what he was doing there. Like that. So conspicuous. Cole didn't answer immediately. He just looked at her with an expression Sarah couldn't quite decipher. There was weariness there, but also something more. Resolution. Decision. As if he had finally chosen something and was at peace with his choice. Sarah stopped in front of him. She said she'd noticed that the men had disappeared. That maybe it was all over. Cole shook his head slowly, and Sarah felt relief begin to slip through her fingers like sand. He said softly, his voice hoarse from smoking too many cigarettes, trying to calm his nerves. They haven't given up. They're just waiting for the right moment. Sarah felt her stomach churn. She asked how he knew. Cole pushed himself away from the car and stood up, hands in his pockets, shoulders tense again. He said he knew the tactic. Create a false sense of security. Make the target relax. Lower their guard. And then attack when no one expected it anymore. Sarah looked around. The street was empty, quiet, even peaceful. But now, knowing what Cole had just said, the peace seemed false. A stage scene. A trap waiting to close. She asked what they should do. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that made Sarah's heart clench in a different way. He said he was leaving. That he had managed to contact someone at the FBI. Someone willing to listen. Someone clean. He was going to meet this agent, hand over the evidence, and disappear while the investigation took place. Sarah felt something break inside her. She asked when. Cole said that very night, that the longer she waited, the more dangerous it became. For him, and especially for her. Sarah swallowed hard. She asked why he had come all the way there then. Why he hadn't simply disappeared. Cole looked away for the first time. He ran a hand through his hair in a gesture Sarah already knew. It meant he was struggling to say something difficult. Finally, he looked back at her and told the truth. He said he couldn't leave without saying goodbye, without thanking her, without saying he was sorry for putting her in danger. Sarah felt her eyes burning, but didn't let the tears fall. She said he didn't need to thank her, that she had made a choice, that she would do it again if she had to. Cole smiled. It was a small, sad smile, full of unspoken things he said he knew. And that was exactly why he needed to leave. Because people like her didn't deserve to live in fear. Didn't deserve to always be looking over their shoulder. Didn't deserve to pay for his mistakes. Sarah stepped forward. She was close enough now to see the details. The fresh scar on his forehead. The bruise that hadn't completely faded on the side of his face. The tired lines around his eyes. She asked what would happen next. After he handed over the evidence, Cole shrugged, said he didn't know. Maybe protected testimony. Maybe jail time until trial. Maybe he'd become the target of everyone who appeared in those documents and wouldn't live long enough to see justice done. Sarah felt her throat tighten. He asked if they would see each other again. Cole remained silent, and the silence was answer enough. Sarah nodded slowly, understanding. This was a dismissal. For real. Not the temporary kind of goodbye. This was the kind that meant never again. No. more conversations in the kitchen. No more that watchful presence on the other side of the window. No more the strange feeling of not being alone. Cole took a step back, creating distance. He said he would stay close until she got home. He would make sure she was safe, and then he would leave. Sarah wanted to protest. She wanted to say she didn't need to. But the words wouldn't come out, because the truth was, she wanted to. She wanted to know he would be there, one last time, watching over her, protecting her, caring for her in a quiet way she had learned to recognize as his language. Sarah got into the car without saying anything else. She started the engine. She looked in the rearview mirror and saw Cole getting into an old car parked 2 spaces behind her. She drove slowly home, parked, went upstairs, entered the apartment, locked the door, and then she went to the window and looked outside. Cole's car was down there, parked, waiting. Sarah stared for a long time, and then, slowly, he started the engine and drove away. The taillights disappeared around the corner, and Sarah was alone, truly alone. For the first time since it had all begun, there was no one watching, no one protecting, no one caring, and the loneliness hurt in a way she hadn't expected. Sarah stayed awake all night, not because I was afraid, but because something inside her had changed in that moment of silent farewell. She had seen in Cole's eyes a determination that went beyond survival. He wasn't just running away. He was going after something. And Sarah realized, with a painful clarity, that she knew that look. It was the same look I saw in the mirror every time I served food to someone hungry. It was the stubbornness to do the right thing even when doing the right thing cost everything. The days that followed were strange. Sarah returned to her routine, but it was as if she were living in a faded version of her own life. She opened the diner, served customers, closed, went up to her empty apartment. And every night she looked out the window, hoping to see a car parked below. But there was never anything. Just an empty street, silence, loneliness. It was on the 5th day that everything changed again. Sarah was clearing the tables after lunch when the door opened. A man entered. He wasn't one of the men in suits who had appeared before. He was different, older, a neatly tailored gray suit, gray hair combed back. He had the kind of presence that made people straighten up. Automatically, authority, but not the menacing authority of the others. It was something more solid, official. He approached the counter and showed a badge. FBI Special Agent Marcus Webb. Sarah felt her heart race. He asked if he could ask a few questions. Sarah nodded, her mouth dry, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. The agent looked around, checking for other customers. There was only a couple in the corner. He lowered his voice. From that moment on, everything began to change. Silently, the agent said he was investigating a corruption ring in the county. He said he had received important evidence from a source. He said that this source had mentioned that Sarah might be in danger. She felt her legs weaken. She asked which source he was talking about. The agent hesitated. Then he said the name, Cole, Sheriff Cole. Sarah leaned against the counter. He asked if Cole was okay. The officer studied her face before answering. He said Cole was in protective custody, that he had handed over enough documents to start one of the biggest investigations the FBI had ever conducted in that region. That a lot of people were going to fall. Powerful people. Dangerous people. Sarah felt a tightening in her chest. She asked why he had come to her. The agent said Cole had insisted. He had said that Sarah was an unwitting witness, that she had helped him without knowing what she was doing, and that now she was exposed. The agent said they could offer protection, relocation, if necessary, but that Sarah needed to decide quickly. Sarah shook her head. She said she wasn't going to run away, that this was her life. The diner, the city, it was all she had. The agent tilted his head, as if he had expected that response. You said you understood, but that at least she needed to be careful. That in the coming weeks, while the warrants were being served, things were going to get dangerous. Desperate people do desperate things. The agent left a card with a number on it. He told her to call if anything strange happened. Sarah took the card and put it in her pocket. She thanked him. The agent nodded and left, leaving Sarah alone with a million thoughts racing through her head. That night, Sarah couldn't stay in the apartment. She was restless, anxious. She needed to do something. He decided to take inventory at the diner, something he'd been putting off for weeks. He went downstairs, turned on only the kitchen lights, and began counting the stock. It was therapeutic and a way mechanical, something concrete, when everything else seemed to be falling apart. She was counting cans of tomato sauce when she heard it, breaking glass, coming from the front of the diner. Sarah froze. Her heart raced. She slowly put down her clipboard and walked to the kitchen door. She peered through the crack. The side window, the one that had been broken weeks ago and finally repaired, was broken again. But this time, someone was breaking in through it. Sarah retreated to the kitchen, panic rising in her throat. She picked up the phone, but before she could dial, she heard voices. 2, maybe 3. Men speaking softly, searching for something, searching for someone, searching for her. Sarah looked around desperately. The back door. You could run out, but what if they had someone waiting outside? What if it was a trap? She heard footsteps approaching. He hid behind the industrial refrigerator, holding his breath, praying they wouldn't find her. Then he heard something else. Sirens, getting louder, closer, and then the voices in the diner changed, swearing, running footsteps, the front door slamming open, more running, and then silence. Sarah hid for a few more minutes that felt like hours. Finally, she heard another voice, familiar. Agent Webb shouting that everything was safe, that she could leave. Sarah stood up, her legs trembling, and left the kitchen. The diner was full of police officers, federal agents, and in the middle of it all, Agent Webb was looking at her with an expression that mixed relief and anger. He said they had arrested 2 men trying to escape, that they had received an anonymous tip about an ongoing break-in. Sarah didn't need to ask who had made the tip. She knew. Cole. Somehow, even in protective custody, even far away, he was still protecting her. Officer Webb insisted she couldn't stay alone any longer, that he was going to put surveillance on the diner until the whole operation was over. Sarah wanted to argue. She wanted to say she could take care of herself, but the truth was, I couldn't. Not against it. Not alone. So she just nodded. In the following days, Sarah watched the city crumble and rebuild itself simultaneously. Arrests happened every day. Names she knew appeared in the news. The police captain, 2 city councilors, the owner of the biggest business in town, all accused, all connected to the operation Cole had exposed. And through it all, Sarah understood more and more deeply what Cole had done. He hadn't just survived. He had chosen to fight. He had chosen to expose the truth even knowing the price. And he had chosen to protect her, even if it meant never seeing her again. She saved the man the town condemned. And now, even from afar, he was showing the difference between justice and revenge. Justice was doing the right thing regardless of the personal cost. Revenge would have been killing all those men when he had the chance. But Cole chose justice. He chose the harder path, the longer path, the path that demanded faith in something greater than himself. 3 weeks later, Sarah was closing the diner when she saw a car pull up across the street. Her heart raced for a second, that old reflex of fear that still hadn't completely disappeared. But then the door opened, and she saw who it was. Cole. He was different, cleaner, shaved, new clothes. But his eyes were the same. Tired, deep, carrying stories that would never be fully told. Sarah dropped her keys on the counter and went out the door. She stopped on the sidewalk, just looking at him from across the street. Cole didn't approach immediately. He stood there, as if waiting for permission, as if he wasn't sure he was still welcome. Sarah felt a pang in her chest. Something between relief and anger, and a tenderness she didn't know she could feel for someone she knew so little, and yet so deeply. Finally, she crossed the street. She stopped in front of him, close enough to see the details. The scar on his forehead had healed. The bruise was gone, but there were new lines around his eyes, new signs of fatigue. Sarah asked if it was over. Cole nodded slowly. He said most had been arrested, that the trials would take years, but that his part was done, that he was free. Sarah asked what that meant. Free. Cole looked at her for a long moment. He said it meant he could choose where to go, what to do, who to be. For the first time in a long time, he had a choice. Sarah felt her throat tighten. She asked what he had chosen. Cole gave a small smile. It was the first genuine smile Sarah had seen on his face. He said he had chosen to return to the town that had condemned him, to return to that roadside diner, to return to the only person who had seen him as human instead of a weapon or a threat. Sarah felt tears welling up, but didn't let them fall. She asked if he was sure, if this was really what he wanted. Cole took a step forward. He was close now, so close that Sarah could feel his warmth. He said he had never been so sure of anything in his life. He said he owed her, not just for saving his life that rainy night, but for reminding him that it was still worth fighting for, that goodness still existed, that he was still capable of protecting instead of just destroying. Sarah couldn't hold back any longer. Tears fell, but they were tears of relief, of exhaustion, of something that perhaps was hope. Cole slowly raised his hand and wiped away the tears with his thumb. It was a gentle gesture, careful, and Sarah understood in that moment that it had all been worth it. The fear, the danger, the loneliness, everything had led up to this point. To this moment when two strangers who had saved each other could finally breathe without carrying the weight of the world alone. She saved the man the city condemned, and he showed her the difference between justice and vengeance. But more than that, they showed each other that kindness wasn't weakness, that protecting wasn't controlling, that choosing to do the right thing, even when it cost everything, was the only thing that truly mattered in the end. If stories about choice, protection, and feelings resonate with you, subscribing to Heart of Protection Stories is a way to continue walking with me through these enduring narratives. Write in the comments, "This story spoke to me," because every word from you shows that these journeys are worth telling. If any part of this story touched you, leave a like so I know I'm not alone in this, and there's a video here that continues in the same vibe of protection and impossible decisions. Click and follow me there, because this journey is just beginning.